silver is a wonderful place to put your wealth if you have any that you want to save. I think it's undervalued. I think it's going to be much more valuable in the future. It's real money. It has intrinsic value. It has everything going for it. The price is absurdly low. What more can I say? So silver's silver, and it's got history behind it. And it's so I'm a big silver bug. Whenever I can, whenever I have a few shekels left over, I try and buy some silver coins.
Right on.
And so.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and tonight is part 2 of the interview with G Edward Griffin, where he digs into his thoughts on the silver market, which I think will make you happy, as well as JFK, the silver certificates, what really did or did not happen there. And it also talks about whether this is playing out now, so many of the things that he wrote about in his historic book. So I think you're going to enjoy what you're about to hear, and here we go. When I see the way the markets now react with the latest, not necessarily what Corona is, but what CNBC or the Wall Street Journal or CNN is saying, this is Corona deaths are spiking, or similar with these trade war headlines, where I've thought it's interesting that if the way things are set up and what somebody tweets, and gee, if somebody knows about that information beforehand, that could really allow similar type behavior to what you just described.
It happens all the time. It's a fact of life. And it's not only having the information ahead of time, but being able to distort the information if you wish, to present false information. If people believe you, if you are considered to be a reputable source of information, because you've paid a lot of money to earn that reputation, then, and if you have a record of delivering accurate information enough times to make it seem credible that you are objective and fair, then when you distort a piece of information, it has maximum impact because people trust you. And this is the game. I mean, you would never have an opponent who wants to fool you in that fashion, doing it all the time. He has to build up your confidence in him. A con artist has to do certain things. A con artist would have to actually produce some profits for people so they could see, oh, this worked, and this worked too. That's how it works. So you have to build up confidence so that when you really switch gears and present false information or administer the coup de grace, so to speak, well, everybody's just trusting you totally. So that's how it works. So this is reality. This is not conspiracy theory. This is history. History.
Yep. And speaking of another area, which I guess would be conspiracy theory to some, although I think it's another one of the areas you've studied, which would be JFK. And Ed, we have a big silver audience here. I think I mentioned to you before. So anything you could touch on with what really was happening with JFK and his interest in silver, and any others, certainly if you have any thoughts on the current silver market, we're big fans of that. So I'll let you take that from there.
Well, the safest position to take on this is to talk about the current silver market, because I don't know what your audience and your followers, what their view is, but I can only guess. My view, at any rate, is that silver is a wonderful place to put your wealth if you have any that you want to save. I think it's undervalued. I think it's going to be much more valuable in the future. It's real money. It has intrinsic value. It has everything going for it. The price is absurdly low. What more can I say? So silver's silver, and it's got history behind it. And it's so I'm a big silver bug. Whenever I can, whenever I have a few shekels left over, I try and buy some silver coins.
Right on.
And so, having said that, now to the hard part. This is where I get some people who are kind of angry with me. The reason is that I call it the myth, the Jfk myth. I wrote about it a little bit in my book, but I have a larger dissertation on it on the website at Freedom Force International about the Jfk Assassination Myth. And so the story that is widely circulated in our circles, the people who believe in sound money and who are not afraid to look at the possible existence of a cabal. In other words, they don't necessarily trust authorities on everything. The story that's circulating is that JFK was probably assassinated because he was going, or was in the process of returning America to sound money. And to support that story, it usually starts off with a statement attributed to Kennedy that he made at a speech at Columbia University, I think it was, in which he said something rather cryptic, but sort of significant if you're thinking in terms of money. He said something like, I must warn the American people about something that very evil is going on, that will affect them deeply. And it was something cryptic, but he didn't say what it was. And then there was an executive order that he signed, which was to create some Treasury notes, which were backed by silver certificates. And putting those two facts together, and then the fact that shortly thereafter he was assassinated, you think, oh wow, Kennedy was about to blow apart the Federal Reserve System and central banking, and that's why they killed him. And of course, I looked at those facts, and at the beginning I thought, oh my gosh, I wouldn't put it past these guys. I mean, that they do these things. And I was all open to it, and I started to do some research, and I wanted to find out what else Kennedy said in that speech. I wanted to find out more about that executive order. I wanted to read it myself. I wanted to not just take the comments that I was getting. So I started by going to Columbia University, and I asked it turned out I was talking to the curator of their archives there, if I could get a copy of the speech, the speech that Kennedy delivered on this date. And the curator said, I'll get back to you on that. Thank you. Well, a few days later, I got the response. And the answer was, well, Mr. Kennedy did not deliver a speech here on that date or any other date. He has never spoken here. And we don't have any copy of such a speech. So I tried to find out if maybe the story was correct in every detail except the universities. So I looked at all the major universities. And then I finally got hold of the White House, I've forgotten what department it was, Secretarial Services or something, and asked if I could find out where Mr. Kennedy was on that date. And I got the answer. He was in the White House. He was not at Columbia University, and that he had never been to Columbia University as far as they knew. And he'd never been anyplace else giving a speech, anything like that. Something, this is weird. So I went then and looked back at the executive order itself, and this got to be kind of hairy. And I won't take a lot of time with it, but here's the bottom line. I don't think that President Kennedy even read that document. It was very complicated. It was very technical. He signed it, but you know how that works. There's a lot of documents that the president has to sign, and only because he's the guy with the signature, but all these decisions are made by his staff and by the Treasury Department and things like that. And this certainly, in my view, was one of them, because what it was a piece of what I would call laundry legislation that needed to alter a previous executive order that had been made a long time ago that was now creating confusion on how to maintain a certain number of Treasury certificates that were required by an ancient law that goes back all the way to shortly after the Civil War. It was a law that was passed that required Congress to keep these silver certificates in circulation in a certain quantity. And as these certificates fall out of circulation, they have to be replaced by new ones. It's a law. And it goes way, way back. And it's been done numerous times. It was just bookkeeping or housekeeping stuff. And it was nothing about changing the monetary system at all. And so he signed it. And then I got to thinking about Kennedy himself, and I started to recall some of the things I'd forgotten, and that is that Kennedy himself was an internationalist. Now, this is where I get into trouble with my friends, because we love Kennedy. He was against the system. He was against the the cabal. There's no question in my mind that he was not part of the inner group. The internationalists, the hardcore group that we're talking about, what we now call the deep state, Kennedy was not in that group. He was an outsider, and he was resented. He was this whippersnapper coming in with the shiny teeth and the charisma, and everybody loved him. Who is this guy? And they really tried to block him on every corner. But the fact is, he was an internationalist. He studied at the London School of Economics, which was the creature of the Fabian Socialist Society in England. And in all of his policies, he was a collectivist. Now, he was strongly opposed to communism. And we know that. And anybody in the period that I came through back in the 60s, we were worried about communism and had a good reason to be. We were saying, anybody that's against communism, that's good. We didn't question, what their political philosophy was. Well, if you question the political philosophy of JFK, it wasn't much different than the neocons of today. He was an internationalist. I have a quote of his that I found. In fact, I think I might have even put it in The Creature from Jekyll Island, which horrified me. He said something like this. He said that now in this new world, this was following World War II, it's a shame that America has so much of an overbalance of resources and wealth compared to the rest of the world. We must do what we can to better redistribute the wealth from America to the other countries of the world. He was a true collectivist, he was a Marxist in many ways, but we don't think of him that way because he was an anti-communist, and also he was assassinated. Now that made him a martyr. And it's, when a person gets assassinated and there's a big funeral and all that kind of thing, there's something that happens emotionally in people, and they cannot think ill, or not easily think ill of that person because they're a martyr for a cause. So once I got all of that cleared up and out of my mind and just looked at what happened, I came to the conclusion that Kennedy was not assassinated because of his signature on that document. And it was just a bookkeeping entry. There were some Treasury notes that were put into circulation. They became collector's items, and that was the end of it. And it was never intended to be any more than that, in my opinion. So that's not the story that people want to hear, because they wanted to hear further proof of. I did not find that.
Yeah, well, I'm a fan of just learning what actually happened and using that for best decision making. So that's actually really fascinating. Last one before we let you run here. Again, really appreciate your time. Given everything that we're seeing happening now, do you think this is close to breaking? I mean, are we close to the point where some of this stuff is exposed, or financially speaking, that the Federal Reserve, I think they've already lost control. It's insane at this point. Obviously, some people look at the break point as when gold and silver are skyrocketing, but whatever you want to define as a breaking point, do you think that it almost feels like if they were going to plan a reset or something like that, this is kind of what it would look like? So any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad you used that word, the reset, because that's become the word now that's being used by these people. The reset. Initially, the reset, I think, was interpreted to mean simply resetting the currency, like they have done so many times. When they get too many zeros on a Zimbabwe $20 trillion bill or something to buy a cup of coffee, it's time to reset the currency, So now one Zimbabwe is worth 20 trillion or something like that. But then as the documents became available and we could listen to their speeches, we found out, no, the reset meant more than that. The reset meant, to these people that have the ability to do the reset, meant to put the final nail in the coffin of anything that resembles capitalism or the free market. The reset includes a complete movement to a collectivist system, whether you call it communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, whatever. Those are merely variants of the underlying ideology, which is collectivism. And that's what the reset is all about. It was given voice and form at the United Nations in the form of Agenda 21. Now it's Agenda 2030. Now they're talking about Agenda 2050. According to these people at the UN, by the time we reach Agenda 2030, it'll be pretty much nailed. And by the time we reach Agenda 2050, it'll be history. People will be reading about it in their history books. So what is this reset? It means the complete elimination of private property, the complete elimination of representative government, the complete elimination of any kind of money that's meaningful. It means the replacement of money that you and I can exchange and perhaps conceal and hoard if we want to for a rainy day, or save for a rainy day. Replacement of that by cryptocurrencies, which is not independent of the governments and the central banks, but controlled by the governments and the central banks. So that's what the reset means. And once you understand what that means, it's pretty alarming, and it means it's on its way. It used to be you could only dream about it and wonder what it would look like. Now we can see it. It's on the horizon. And if you get the telescope, you can see the details, and it's moving this way.
Yeah, well, although fortunately, on the other hand, you've been kind enough to create the solution. And understandably, one of the questions that always comes up is, all right, well, what can I actually do about that? And fortunately, I mean, on top of everything else you've done, you've mapped out the solution as well. So perhaps you could just tell people about Red Pill University and the Expo.
Yeah, well, that sounds kind of grandiose. I've mapped out the solution. I wish I could be that confident. I have mapped out what I think is the solution, and the reason I think it is because I have studied our opponents intensely over the years, and I think I know almost everything of importance to know about their strategies and tactics. And I've asked myself over the years many times, how did they do it? They took over America without firing a shot. They took over America and other countries, by the way. All the Western countries were taken over by this thing called collectivism without a revolution. I mean, not one in the streets. It was a revolution, but it was not the revolution of force and violence that we think of. And I discovered, somewhere along the line that there are two revolutions out there. In fact, I did a documentary, well, not a documentary film, but a lecture on it back in 1969, and I'd forgotten about it. And just, as you mentioned it, it's ironic because only a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from somebody that said, yeah, Ed, I saw one of your old speeches. It's going viral on the internet. I said, oh, really? That's nice. Which one? And they said it was called More Deadly Than War, the Communist Revolution in America.
I got that. I watched that too. I saw it. It was passed along to me.
Yeah. So I said, oh, yeah, I remember that. So I went and looked at it, and I said, yeah, I'd forgotten about having done this thing. And it was sitting in my vault of all the tapes, the master tapes. I said, well, since people want to see it again, I went down to Hollywood and had it remastered, redigitized, got a better quality picture out of it, reposted it onto our Red Pill University site, and now it's really going viral, I understand. In fact, I understand it's going viral in Brazil. Carlene called me last night and said, Mr. G, do you know that you're famous in Brazil? And I said, no, I didn't know that. She said, yeah, they're playing your video with English subtitles and everything. And she said, I got a version of it, and their commentary is, we put it into English subtitles for you. I said English. I meant to say they put it into Portuguese subtitles so they can understand it in Brazil, which they use Portuguese as their language there. So anyway, having said that, this lecture, More Deadly Than War, is all about the two kinds of revolution I'm discussing here. There is the one of force and violence. Everybody thinks about that when they think of communist revolutions, and they see what's going on in our streets today, and they recognize that that is a replica of what goes on in the streets of every country that has been taken over by communism. And so the inclination is to say, oh, well, that's how they're planning to do it here. Force and violence, they're going to overthrow the government. But then what they don't know is that there is another kind of revolution that I learned all about when I was in the 60s. I used to hang out at the communist bookstore, as a matter of fact. And I read all these documents, and some of them you'll find in this video. I pull them out and I show them and I read them, And those documents are very clear that in countries like the United States, and they named the United States specifically, that the the wedge that they will try to drive into the country to divide people, divide and conquer strategy, has to be along racial lines, because that, they figured, was the most opportune, the most ripe, the best. They couldn't divide us on religion enough. They couldn't divide us on sex enough, although they came pretty close to it in a while. They couldn't divide us on our ethnic background or anything like that. Or they really wanted to divide us on class. The capitalist exploiters and the working class, the exploited and the downtrodden. That's the classic. So, but they said that they couldn't do that. It didn't have enough revolutionary fire to it. So they said race is what we would use in America, black against white. And then they said, however, the black minority is a minority, and we could never come to power in the whole country on that basis. So we have to use that only to create violence in the streets and to scare everybody and to condition them into accepting the real revolution, which is what they called the proletarian revolution, or what I call the nonviolent revolution. And that is the moving the country step by step, law by law, through the legislature and through elections, the legal process, moving it from where we were until we wind up in communism. The same place that we would wind up with the violent revolution, except it's a gradual and it's a legal process. It's a nonviolent process. And the whole value of the violent process was to provide the fire and the motivation and the drama and the panic and the fear to condition people to accept those steps, faster and bigger steps toward communism. I thought, well, that's, of course, the strategy. That was the film, what the film was all about. And now people are beginning to learn that in spite of all this violence in the streets, there's nothing phony about that, except it's staged, but it's real violence. The real action in America are these laws that are being passed through Congress right now that are taking away our liberties and pushing us into this collectivist state called communism, socialism, fascism, whatever you want to call it. Let's call it communism. And we're getting very close to that now. And it's not, the violence hasn't done it except to accelerate it. That's all. So that's the story about what's happening in our streets today and what I see happening. It's a classic implementation of Marxist-Leninist strategy for converting America into a communist system where the people would never even know it because the word has not been used. The word socialism will be used instead.
Yeah, and again, if people want to be able to read through a lot of these things, we do have Red Pill University, which will be in the description box below. And also, good to hear that you're still looking on track at the moment for the Red Pill Expo, which is in Jekyll Island, Georgia, October 10th to 11th.
Yes.
So hopefully,
well, I might, if I could just interrupt for a second there before we leave the university. I talked about this video, but I didn't talk about the university. So I'll make that very short. So what is the university? It's a place where people can get this information where they can't be blocked off of the YouTube or Vimeo. I got knocked off of Vimeo, surprisingly. And so we've had to really get resourceful. We're back on, and we're not going to be knocked off again. So the information will be there anytime somebody wants to really find out what's going on. And secondly, our goal is to establish local units in every county in the United States called campuses. We have to create a counterforce, boots on the ground. We can't do this on the internet. We can't do this in cyberspace. We have to form into local groups. We have to protect each other. We have to meet each other eyeball to eyeball, develop friendships, know who you can trust. We have to create political movements on the ground. We have to replace members of our county commission, our mayor, our city hall, our school board, our local sheriff. This is all local stuff. And the reason we've been losing this war is because our opponents have been doing that for decades. It's time now. It's a little late, but we're starting late, but we can still do it. And that's what Red Pill University is all about. It's not just looking at more videos. It's creating a pushback organization with ideals and goals. We know what we want as well as what we don't want. And so it's much more than just another website and a place to go look at some more videos. It's a place to bring back the system.
Well, I sure appreciate that, because one of the questions that I've gotten the most in the time that I've been studying a lot of these topics is that, people after the overwhelm wears off, they say, "What can I do?" And fortunately, you've put that together and given people some steps. And also, they feel like they're the lone wolf. So if you want to connect with people, again, there is the redpilluniversity.org, which will be in the description link below. And G Edward Griffin, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I feel like I'm honored to be a part of history that you just left behind in this last hour call. And I know people are really going to appreciate that. The Silver fans are, they're going to be happy too. And so thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to talk to you and to all your friends. So hope to see you all over there at Red Pill University.